The interactive drama, made available on the streaming platform on December 28, breaks down boundaries by offering viewers the chance to make choices on behalf of the main character, Stefan Butler, as he designs a computer game called Bandersnatch in, appropriately, given that Big Brother really is watching him, 1984, based on a choose-your-own-adventure book of the same name. But for Ian, co-founder of game designer Games Workshop, it had a familiar feel to it. For in 1982, he, along with business partner Steve Jackson, had faced many of the same problems which drive Stefan, played by Fionn Whitehead, to distraction when the pair wrote The Warlock of Firetop Mountain. The book was the first in a series of fighting fantasy game books which likewise required readers to make choices which altered the story they were reading. Ian, who went on to write dozens more fighting fantasy titles, as well as becoming a pioneering video game designer, serving on the board of Eidos, said, "A lot of people have been saying that Bandersnatch owes its origins to fighting fantasy, which is very flattering. I've seen it and I enjoyed it, even though it was a little macabre. It was very powerful stuff." He also suggested others will follow in Brooker's footsteps, even though the screen-wide presenter has indicated he is in no hurry to repeat the exercise, citing the tremendous complexity of keeping track of multiple narratives. Ian explained, "I'm very pleased to see it happening. It's an excellent starting point for a new genre. I don't think it will ever completely replace linear narratives, but it will supplement them. I could certainly relate to what was going on in that show." Ian and Steve had already secured the British distribution rights to groundbreaking US Dungeons & Dragons, heavily featured in another Netflix smash hit, Stranger Things, a role-playing game, Rebounds the Game, in which players create alter egos and explore strange fantasy worlds, usually with the help of floor plans, lead figures and polysided dice, plus of course the referee, known as the Dungeon Master. Ian also edited White Dwarf, a cult magazine devoted to the hobby which continues to be published to this day. The pair first hit upon the idea for fighting fantasy while running a gaming convention at which Puffin Books, the subsidiary of Penguin responsible for children's fiction, had a stall. Puffin editor Geraldine Cook was fascinated by the enthusiasm on display and asked Ian if he would be interested in writing a book about the hobby, but instead he suggested a book which allowed readers to immerse themselves in the world of RPGs. He said, "Of course." We then set ourselves a problem. How could we distill the essence of a role-playing game and replace the Dungeon Master with the narrator? We opted for a multiple-choice type adventure with a simplified gaming system which used 6-sided dice. They came up with a basic adventure called Magic Quest, which was enough to earn them a deal with Puffin, although Ian said another book editor at the company had laughed so hard at the apparent ridiculousness of the idea he had actually hit his head on the desk. Ian admits writing the book was a nightmare, adding, "I could certainly relate to what was going on in that show. The problem was we were working on several different stories at once, and at certain points we would have to bring them back to pinch points where they would cross and overlap. There were multiple paths and then we had to playtest it to make sure there were no loops you could never get out of. Steve and I wrote the first one together because we weren't sure there would be another. I wrote the first half and he wrote the second." Much like Stefan, Ian and Steve also dug their heels in to prevent any corner cutting, especially with the book's illustrations. Uncertain as to what they had, Puffin only ordered an initial print run for Warlock of 5,000 copies, but many ordered more after these sold out a matter of days, and commissioned more titles, which arrived the following year in the shape of The Forest of Doom, written by Ian, and The Citadel of Chaos, written by Steve. Ian said, The pressure from Penguin was enormous, which was another thing I could relate to from Bandersnatch. Penguin were manic for more. Along the way, he and Steve also had to contend with prejudice and standard accusations of geekdom from those who refused to take the books seriously. He said, "I remember going on Saturday morning swap shop once and John Craven interviewing me and saying something like, 'When are you going to write a proper book then?' That was the sort of thing we were up against." The pair had the last laugh, however. In total, the series sold 20 million copies in the 1980s and 1990s, and are still being published, these days by Scholastic. Ian explained, "This was before the internet, so it spread by word of mouth, in the playground. They were huge, but somehow nobody knew about them because they got no publicity." Ian wrote a new book, The Port of Peril, in 2017 to mark the 35th anniversary of the series, and last year 6 more titles were published, including one by Fast Show actor Charlie Higson, and in 2013 he was awarded a CBE for services to gaming industry, to go with the OBE he collected in 2006. Meanwhile, Mr. Craven continues to present Country File. Ian added, "There's been something of a resurgence of role-playing games, just as there has been a resurgence of vinyl and board games. Plus, of course, in this country we are blessed with a wealth of fairy tales, myths and legends. These days, what with Game of Thrones, The Lord of the Rings films and Stranger Things, geek